Well, welcome to another edition. We're doing a joint one today of the two podcasts we do for Aussie Home Loans to deal with anyone in Australia. We've got clients in every state and capital, and their areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, personal loans, debt consolidation, cash out, construction and pre-approvals. And they've got over 25 lenders on their panel. And of course, our podcasts are Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures, and also Inclusion Talks with the Paralympics just around the corner. And my guest today has had an outstanding career as a journalist. I got to know this lovely lady quite a few years ago, and I was in my last few years at the ABC, an outstanding producer, broadcaster, storyteller, journalist, and she's been involved in a lot of Paralympic Games, 4 to be precise, 3 summer, 1 winter. She's also done a couple of Olympic Games, London in 2012, and we look forward to getting her perspective of what happened in Paris recently, just over the last few weeks. It's a great pleasure to welcome to the program esteemed ABC journalist Amanda Shalala. Amanda, great to catch up. Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Dan. Very excited to join you and talk about all things Paralympics. And I would just like to acknowledge that I am coming to you from Dharawal land.
Now, Amanda, we'll start with the Olympics. What was that experience like here in Paris?
It was amazing, Dan. It was absolutely a career highlight. I think especially after Tokyo, I didn't cover those games, but to have the COVID-affected games with no crowds, it really felt like going back to the Olympics proper, and to have it in such an iconic city was truly special. I mean, Paris is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Everywhere you walk, it doesn't matter where you are, there's something that smacks you in the face and you think, oh my goodness, this is spectacular. Then you turn another corner and there's something even more beautiful. So that certainly added to it, to have a setting as picturesque and as aesthetically beautiful as Paris is. But the way that organisers pulled off these games, I think they have to be applauded as well. It was very ambitious, even from the opening ceremony along the River Seine. Never before had one been done outside a stadium. That was executed flawlessly. All the venues, the way that they incorporated the city, like with the Eiffel Tower Stadium for the beach volleyball, that's one of the best stadiums I've ever been to in my life. You couldn't imagine a better setting. The crowds, every venue was absolutely packed. The crowds loved it, got behind it. And then, of course, the Australian performances as well helped. So, yes, safe to say I loved it.
They used the venues well, didn't they, as you said? I mean, the Eiffel Tower couldn't be any other place but for the beach volleyball, could it?
Yeah, and beach volleyball, that's become a trademark for those competitions now, to have it in really spectacular venues. For the Paralympics, flying football will be playing. So fantastic they're utilising that venue again. And most of the venues that we used for the Olympics will be used for the Paralympics as well, which is great because you want to show off the city to the people watching from all over the world.
Would you like to have been there for, this is probably a very silly question, Amanda, would you like to have been there for the Paralympics? But I suppose the budget can only go so far now, can't it?
I would have loved to have been there, but we have a fantastic team over there. The ABC News is there. And I think in the spirit of fairness and everybody getting a go, there were other reporters that got to go for the Paralympics. So we didn't hog it all for the Olympics. So our national sport reporter, David Mark, is over there along with Charles Bryce and a camera operator, Michael Franchi. So they're covering everything on the ground for ABC News. But we have an extensive team from Australia covering it as well, including me. So I am still covering the games, just doing it from home, getting very little sleep, working late hours, but that's okay because I love it.
Of course you do. Yeah, if you didn't love it, we wouldn't be doing the job we do. That's why we keep doing it, don't we? Now, was there something that stood out at the Olympic Games that you thought, gee, that was pretty special?
From an Australian perspective, I think Noemi Fox's gold in the kayak cross was something that will stay with me for a very long time, particularly because we followed Noemi for a documentary we produced for ABC Sport called Countdown to Paris, where we followed 5 athletes aspiring to go to the Olympics and the Paralympics, and Noemi was one of them. So to see her journey of just fighting to even qualify, she had one of the toughest qualification pathways to even get to the Games because Australia's 1 quota positions went to her sister, Jess. So to fight through that and then go through 4 sudden death races in a very brutal sport like kayak cross, where anything can happen, to come out and win that was pretty spectacular.
Were you thinking because it was all elimination, all cutthroat, all sudden death, just to get to the Olympics, that it's exactly the same in the sport itself, that she was so well prepared, maybe better prepared than a lot of the other athletes who, of course, had either competed in K1 or the C1 events that her sister so brilliantly won.
Exactly. And so she was one of the only athletes that had solely been focusing on
Mm.
kayak cross for over a year. So I think that in the end, that gave her a real edge. Everyone else was trying to juggle the other disciplines. And we saw with Jess Fox, she was top ranked in the kayak cross, but anything can happen in that sport. And she didn't have the same preparation as Noemi did. So certainly the mental resilience and tenacity and that experience of sudden death racing held Noemi in good stead. And she's just the most beautiful person as well. So you like to see good people getting their rewards. And that's certainly the case for the Fox family overall.
I don't think that Jess will be too disappointed. She did, of course, finally break the
No.
duck and win the K1. She won the C1. We've already seen her back in Australia, that she was presenting the sport on the Today program on Channel 9. I think the sky's the limit for her. Do you think, Amanda, she could become one of the most recognisable athletes in this country in the next 12 months or so?
I think she's probably already there. I would say she's probably come out as Australia's biggest star from these games, even eclipsing the swimmers. So we always celebrate the swimmers because they tend to bring in most of the gold medals. Ariane Titmus, Kaylee McEwen, Molly O'Callaghan. There were so many that had great games. But I do think Jess Fox, her storyline, being the opening ceremony flag bearer, the way in which she won the kayak event, which she had never won a gold medal before in, and she went very early in that final because she hadn't qualified in a high position. So she was just put out her best run early on and just sat there waiting and waiting and hoping no one else would best it. And she did that. Then to win the C1 in the emphatic manner that she did, and how we learned so much more about all of the family, Miriam, her mum and her coach, Dad, Richard, also an Olympian. I think Jess is probably one of the most popular sports figures in Australia at the moment, and her star will continue to rise, although it was already shining pretty brightly.
It was excruciating watching her. I was getting very nervous. She was just obviously on the outside. She just had to put on a persona as you would. She knew the camera would be on her. She's very experienced. And she just sat there. She had a tough semi-final run. I thought at one stage, oh, don't tell me she's going to miss out here. But she found a way, and then she just blew them away. And you just thought, I reckon she'll be here at the end. Every time the next athlete would come up and would miss, she's still sitting there. She's still sitting there. She's still sitting there. I mean, she is just a genius, really, in that sport, Amanda, isn't she?
This is what separates elite athletes from the rest of us, because I was there at the venue and I was a complete mess, trying to be very professional as a journalist, but also you get emotionally invested in these athletes. So I'm stressed out, pulling out my hair, and she's there cool, calm and collected. But she already was the greatest paddler of all time, statistically, with the amount of world titles she has, the amount of Olympic medals she has. But to win the 2 gold really cements her legacy, I think, and just takes it out of it. It's not even a conversation. She is the greatest that sport has ever seen, and she's still got plenty more to come. She's still relatively young in that sport's terms, 30 years old. And she's the entire package. She's a wonderful role model. She's a great leader, a great public speaker, a really good person, and fantastic at her sport. So yeah, it was fantastic to see her come through with the 2 golds. I mean, and so is the Sakakibara. I should mention her as well. That was another big highlight for me, seeing her, in the BMX.
Yeah, that was, I mean, because that was an emotional story. And we can talk about it in a minute. Her brothers got into rowing in the Paralympic or all abilities sport area, and we wish him all the best. He's obviously a very determined young man. It's great to see him back and living some sort of normal life, which is wonderful. But she was superb. She was going to give it away, and she's come back. I just reckon that was fantastic.
Especially after Tokyo, she crashed in the
Yeah.
semi-finals and she was suffering these long-term effects of concussion. And after what had happened to Kai, who suffered a traumatic brain injury in a BMX accident, so there was that kind of lingering. And then for her to come back from her own concussions, go through her own healing journey and perform the way she did in Paris, which was dominant. she was dominant throughout every race in Paris, all the way through to the final. And it was really nice as well because her partner, Romain Mathieu, who is on the French team, he won a bronze medal about
Right.
20 minutes before in a clean sweep of the podium in the men's race. And she came out, won the women's event. But to see her embracing Kai at the end after she finished the race, everyone was crying. I think in Australia and over there as well, everyone was crying because that was one of the most purely emotional, beautiful moments of the Games.
I'm speaking to esteemed ABC journalist Amanda Shalala, who was just at the Olympic Games, and she'll be covering again her 5th Paralympic Games, whether they be summer or winter, back home in Australia, which she'll have a lot of work to do. And as she said, she won't be getting a lot of sleep at normal times when people sleep in this country as the Paralympics get underway in a couple of days. But dashing down to Olympic Adventures and Conclusion Talks, a podcast to do with my great mate Cindy McDougall. And Cindy, I wish you all the best. A lot going on in her family at the moment. We're here for Aussie Home Loans. Can I ask you, Amanda, just on the Olympics, because the ABC television did not have the rights and haven't had the rights for a long time, could you, considering ABC radio had some form of rights depending on where you could listen to it in the country, could you use that as a fact you could get access to interviews that non-rights holders could not get access to, or were you predominantly working for ABC television, which meant you basically had to wait? How did that work?
Yeah, so the radio rights for ABC Radio came in very late in the piece. I think it was literally only days before the Games began. So our accreditation was sorted out months beforehand through ABC News as non-rights holders. So we're very fortunate because we were still able to go into venues and watch sport, but it just meant we couldn't record anything inside the venues. So we would go in, watch what unfolded, and then head outside. Then outside, we were able to film interviews with fans who were coming out of the venues. There were often family members who were coming out, so we would interview them. And the Australian Olympic Committee would organise for any medalists to be taken to a site where we were allowed to film, so we could interview them as well. So although we didn't have access inside, we still got to experience the Games fully by watching them and still get to soak up all the colour and atmosphere and do all the news gathering that we needed to from a safe distance outside the venues, because of course, as you know, the broadcasters pay mega bucks to get the rights to show the Games. So we have to respect that and report within those boundaries.
How did you feel as an ABC staff member that the ABC got the rights to do the Games? Now, I live in Melbourne, so I couldn't listen to it unless it was in the country or you got it on your app. But Adelaide don't have a 3AW affiliated radio station, so they got it in the capital city. Hobart got it in the capital city. Darwin got it in the capital city. And, of course, all the other states that do have Channel 9 affiliated radio stations got it in the country. I believe it went really, really well. So it is good that it was back, wasn't it, in some form with the ABC?
Definitely. I mean, the ABC has such a long and storied history with broadcasting sport generally, but particularly the Olympics and the Paralympics. So I think it was important for us to have some sort of presence in whatever markets we could get. And there were still big markets that we were able to broadcast to. It went exceptionally well. It was very well received, high listenership across all those different markets. So I'm really glad that they managed to get that. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for the Paralympics. So that is a shame that ABC doesn't have the radio rights for the Paralympics. But you know, I'm not involved in that. Hopefully for the next ones, it can be sorted out. But at least as a positive, we managed to have the Olympics.
Can I ask you about these documentaries that you did? I mean, I don't think the ABC, I don't think there's anyone that does documentary or storytelling better than the ABC with all the shows that they've got. How proud are you of those documentaries on those Olympians in the lead up to the Games? I mean, they were fantastic. They were special, weren't they?
Yeah, incredibly proud. Countdown to Paris was something we worked on for close to a year. And we were very mindful of thinking about who we chose as well and having a diverse range of athletes. That's why it was important for us to not just make it about Olympians. We included Paralympians as well. So we had Naomi Fox, Melissa Wu, the diver, 5-time Olympian, and Campbell Harrison, who's a new athlete in sport climbing for the Olympians, and Jamison Leeson from boccia, and Alistair Donohoe from paracycling for the Paralympians. These athletes were so open and generous and giving with their time to allow us to come in and pop into their lives throughout the course of the past 10 months or so and check in with them and see how they were going and being very honest about their journeys. They've all had challenging journeys for different reasons, and all had really incredibly compelling stories as well. So you can still watch it. It's on YouTube and on ABC iView, Countdown to Paris. I would highly recommend it, of course, being biased, having produced it. But I think it's important to get a chance to tell these stories of athletes who may not necessarily be household names as well. So, we know the Jess Foxes and Ariane Titmuses and all of those, but there are so many others that, deserve a bit of the spotlight as well. So I'm proud that we were able to shine that spotlight and tell these stories of incredible athletes.
You're one of the great professionals in this industry, Amanda, but have they become friends of yours?
No, I don't. You do have to keep that professional relationship. Although, as I said, you get emotionally invested. Like I did see Naomi Fox after her win, and we had a bit of a hug and
Right.
a bit of, of that. So I think, you have that really lovely professional working relationship, which I enjoy. We're not, best friends going to go hang out and party on the weekend, but that's not what our job is.
Do you prefer behind the camera or in front of it?
I like doing everything. I genuinely do. I really enjoy reporting and being able to be an on-air journalist or broadcaster and share experiences in that way. But there's something that can be a bit more freeing sometimes when you are behind the scenes as well, because you can maybe a little bit more, produce something a little bit more extensive, I should say, like we did with that 1 hour documentary. Or I quite enjoy doing writing to our website now, more so than I did earlier in my career, where I really was just a broadcast journalist. So I like to have as many strings to my bow as possible, because it can be a fickle industry. So the more multi-skilled you are, the more likely you are to keep a job into the future.
You did the interviews, didn't you? I mean, we just didn't see your face, did we? You did the interviews, and it was just predominantly the talent that we saw. But they were your questions, weren't they?
There was myself and 3 other
Oh,
co-producers.
right.
So we
Okay.
each produced different athletes. Yeah, so it really was a very much a collaborative effort. So it was myself, David Mark, Liz Wright, and Damien Peck, who were all producers on the project, and we each followed different athletes and did the interviews with them. But that was important for us not to have any one of us as the presenter or the narrator. We really wanted the athletes to drive the story and be the ones to tell their own story rather than us as the journalists.
Journalist Amanda Shalala is getting ready after having just come back from Paris to cover the, of course, all-important Paris Paralympics, which are about to get underway. And Australia, again, looking to perform well as they have in previous Paralympic Games, whether it be in summer or winter disciplines. We're here for Dashing Down to Olympic Adventures and also for inclusion talks. Thanks to Aussie Home Loans, who've got over 25 lenders on their panel, and they deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital, and they do Zoom as well. Well, to the Paralympics, Amanda, what are you expecting from an Australian perspective?
I think we can have high hopes for these Paralympics. So the past few games, if we look at Athens, Beijing, London, Rio, Australia was 5th on the medal tally, which is an excellent result. They slipped back to 8th in Tokyo, but I think, COVID had a lot to do with that. So I think a top 5 finish would be what Paralympics Australia would be targeting, and I think would be a fantastic result. And there are so many great medal prospects across the board in many different sports. So I'll pick out a few. I'll probably leave some out, but I'll try and go with some of my personal highlights. Swimming and athletics are always the biggest breadwinners, so to speak, for Australia at a Paralympic Games. And I think we should see a lot of success there again. Maddie Di Rosario is the name that everybody will know and love. She is going to be the opening ceremony flag bearer alongside swimmer Brendan Hall. She finally broke through for gold in Tokyo after making her Paralympic debut in Beijing as a teenager. She got the gold she wanted. She got 2 in Tokyo in the marathon and the 800 meters, and she'll again be the favorite for the marathon. This time she's dropped the 800 from her program, focusing on the longer events, the 1500, the 5K, and the marathon. But I think particularly the marathon is the one that she'll really want to be getting the gold in, and we keep our fingers crossed for her. I think she can do it. She's in the form of her life at the moment. Vanessa Lowe is another to watch out for in the track and field, the long jumper who won gold in Tokyo, a previous gold medalist for Germany, but she married an Australian Paralympian, Scott Reardon. She's a very proud Australian now. She competed in the green and gold in Tokyo and back for Australia at these games In the pool, Alexa Leary, I think, could be one of the real feel-good stories of these games. She was an up-and-coming triathlete, and she had a cycling accident 3 years ago. It left her with serious brain injury, multiple breaks all over her body. She was told that she wouldn't live, and she has been told it's a miracle that she has survived. Not only has she survived, she has come back. She's turned to Paralympic sport. She's now in swimming and is in really good form in her class in the 100 meters freestyle, and definitely one of the favorites for that event. So that would be really beautiful if she could manage to get a medal in that event after what she's been through the past few years. Another couple of swimmers, Lakeisha Patterson, Rachel Watson, they're both two-time defending champions in their respective events, the 400 freestyle and 50 freestyle. Lauren Parker is someone who is making a bit of history for Australia. She'll be competing in paracycling and paratriathlon. She's the first Australian since two athletes did it in Barcelona, 92. So it's been a long time since we've had a Paralympian competing in two different sports at the same games, and she's a world champion in each of those sports as well. Amazing. Curtis McGrath, who is the co-captain of the team, two golds in the canoeing events, and the Steelers. I'm really looking forward to seeing the Steelers in the wheelchair rugby, and they have 3 women in their squad. First time. Last time in Tokyo, they had 1 woman, but now they have 3. It is a mixed gender sport, but we rarely see women featuring in wheelchair rugby squads. Paralympics Australia has made this a real focus, and I think that is such a positive to see them actually making an effort to make the mixed gender sport in name a reality, and they are 3 outstanding women in that sport who will contribute greatly.
Now, Amanda, there was a documentary on another television station. You've probably seen it on the wheelchair team. It's a brutal sport, that, isn't it? Brutal. And this team, this time, had to do it the long way to get in, but they found a way, didn't they? Without, and I mean, their coach said it, and Chris Batt, I think, one of their star players said it. They weren't that impressive, but again, they found a way. So the fact they found a way, and they've had a lot of matches in the lead up and a lot of elimination matches, they should be well tuned both physically and mentally, shouldn't they?
Yeah, they had to go through the last gasp qualification event, which is unusual for them. They're so used to being the favourites and having it all wrapped up nice and early, but they are a team of champions. They have that winning mentality. Even with the fresh blood coming through, they still have the old veterans, Riley Batt, who I can't believe he's still going around. He debuted in Athens. That's 20 years ago, and he's still going, and he could probably still go to LA if he wanted to. He is still one of the best wheelchair rugby players in the world. Chris Bonds, the captain, is another phenomenal athlete. Shay Graham, who's one of the women I mentioned, who is part of the team, she is such an excellent player, brings so much to that team. So I think they're really in a good position to get back onto the podium where they want to be. They always set very high expectations. They'll want the gold. They're not afraid of saying that. It's going to be tough, but I think they can do it.
There was a great answer from Riley Batt when they said, "How's your shoulder in training?" He said, "Well, we're being filmed. I won't use the word I would normally use." He said, "It's stuffed. I'm in real trouble, but nothing will stop me from getting there. Nothing."
Yeah.
He said, "I'm in real trouble, and it's not good and it may never be good again, but I'm going." And that just probably tells you a fair bit about him, doesn't it?
But that's the athlete life, though, isn't it? They put everything on the line, and knowing they may suffer long-term consequences later in life, they have a short time span to be an elite athlete, especially Riley, who's been there for such a long time. He grew up in that team. He was just a young teenager when he started. That team means everything to him. So he will give whatever it takes to try and help them get to where they want to be. It is one of the most popular Paralympic sports as well. It's the one I think everyone really tunes into. It has one of the higher profiles. So I think it means a lot to them to be able to represent themselves well and represent Australia well on the Paralympic stage.
On one of our podcast, Inclusion Talks, Amanda, and we're also speaking to Amanda Shalala on Inclusion Talks and Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. We spoke to Julie Charlton, who you know well, who's done some work with you, shadowing you at the ABC. And she hates the I word, which is inspiration amongst athletes who have disabilities. But to me, they are an inspiration, for want of a better expression. How would you describe these athletes? Is there a word? If it's not inspiration or inspiring, what's the word that makes you sit up and take notice and think these people are special?
Yeah. Oh, Julie is wonderful. We were lucky enough to have her with us as an intern with ABC Sport in the lead up to the Commonwealth Games, which Julie competed at and did really well, and now has a flourishing coaching business. So very happy to see them doing fantastic things. In terms of that word inspirational, though, yeah, that is something that we hear a lot from Paralympians. And I guess it depends on the context. They said, we don't want to just be described as extraordinary or inspirational just for existing or just for doing our sport, because that's just something that it's suggesting that expectations were low. That's where I think it can great, because it's suggesting, okay, the bar was set so low that, oh, you're an inspiration just for getting out of bed. And that can be very condescending to them. So describing your achievements, take it on an individual merit. When you see something like, Maddie Di Rosario winning the wheelchair marathon after all that build up and lead up, you just, all the superlatives that we might use for a non-disabled athlete as well, we can come out with, of course, appreciating the extra hurdles that they may have had to face. There are extra barriers for people with disability. Even in Australia, we're very far advanced, but still there are extra barriers for them to be able to get involved with sport. The participation rates of people with disability in sport are much lower than non-disabled people. The numbers are then even lower for women and non-binary people with disability in sport. So I think when thinking about what they've done and what they've achieved, we take it on its merit. We take it with their advice and what they want as well and how they want to be described, but appreciating that what they're doing, most of us could not ever imagine doing. And so I think it is fair and right that we can draw so much from what they achieve and what they do, because quite simply, I don't think you and I could ever dream of doing anything as extraordinary as they do.
I'm sure you did a lot of preparation. I've always prided myself on my preparation. I hear you do too. In regard to the categories, how long did it take you to get to understand every single category? Because there are so many of them, aren't there?
I think it's very challenging with classifications, and you can't necessarily be an expert in every single one. So I think you study up on it as much as you can. There are fantastic resources. The internet has really useful on it. We have produced our own guides as well for the ABC. We have one coming out from Henry Hansen, who explains all what the classifications are, what it means, how to decipher it. Andrew McGarry has also done a fantastic one for ABC News. So I think what is important is making an effort to learn about it. No one's expected to memorize, what's an S4 versus an F11, but have a general understanding. Okay, what does the number mean? What does the letter mean? So I know if it's an S, automatically I know that's a swimming event. Or if it's an F, I know that's a field event for track and field. Or a T means track. And the numbers, again, just having a basic understanding. Okay, in swimming, it goes through 1 to 14. 1 means the highest level of impairment. And then when you go up to 10, I think it is 10 means the lowest level of impairment. And then 11 is vision impaired, 14 is intellectually impaired. So it's just those kinds of things which I think are really helpful to remember. And it's just a basic sign of respect in terms of covering it. We are professionals, we're journalists, we're broadcasters. There's no excuse for us to say, it's too hard, it's too complicated, I can't figure it out. No way. Just as we would do our research for anything, we need to do it for classification, because it is an essential part of the Paralympics. It is something that is through every single sport. We have to know about it, and we have to be able to communicate it in a way that makes sense to our audience as well. So we've got to do the hard work so the audience doesn't have to do the heavy lifting and they can just enjoy the sport.
If there's a controversy, Amanda, and obviously you need to be across this, don't you? This is where your knowledge of the categories is important too, where you think, I'm not sure that person's in the right category. How do you approach that?
I think it depends. If it's just my own personal opinion, I probably would leave it out. But I think we'll be talking to the people involved is really important. Athletes often get reclassified. So that is something that we might have to tackle and try and explain. So, for example, Lakeisha Patterson used to swim as an S8 swimmer. Then she was reclassified as an S9, which meant she was then competing against athletes with a lower level of impairment. And she still managed to win gold in that event. So really, to understand that, I would be talking to Paralympics Australia. Talking to classifiers as well really helps, because they're the ones who are making these determinations, and understanding that classification for many athletes is not always set in stone. So for some, their impairment will never change and they will always be in that classification. But for others with a range of impairments, for example, like cerebral palsy with Lakeisha Patterson, it may change over time. So I think that's where we're coming in. I wouldn't be coming in with an opinion out of the blue. It would be informed knowledge of the situation and trying to explain it in that context. Like, okay, well, we shouldn't be jumping to conclusions because someone who was an S8 is now an S9. Let's understand it in how classification works and the nature of that person's impairment as well.
Does it ever change, or does it change often, if an athlete, especially maybe something like at the S8 S9s for cerebral palsy, that like Lakeisha, who's dominating the S8s, they think that, well, there's nothing different with her impairment compared to the last category placement before the previous Paralympics, but she's just too strong in S8. We put her up to S9. Does that not come into it at all?
Well, they have to go through the proper classification process. So it wouldn't just be based on her time. It wouldn't just be based on her times. And the whole process, it involves having a medical appointment, providing medical documentation. Then the athlete is actually observed doing their sport by a classifier. So they would do certain exercises that they might have to do, like doing some laps of the pool, that kind of thing, where they are actually observed. So it couldn't just be as straightforward as, oh, we've seen this time, we're going to change you. They need to go through the entire process. And again, I'd recommend looking at Henry Hansen's article on the ABC News website, which goes into detail around this. And we have a video explaining all of this as well, because it's all the questions people have when it comes to the Paralympics. So we know it's important to explain it in a way that makes sense to a wider audience.
What about a sport like bocce? And as you mentioned, one of the athletes that you featured in your documentary, and she was fantastic. And of course, she has assistants. Do you need to learn all the rules there to understand what's going on, particularly if you're covering it? That, again, looks like a sport that would take a fair bit of work to understand. It looks like a great sport, but again, it doesn't look easy, does it?
Yeah, I think it depends. Like if you're commentating, I think you really do need to know the ins and outs of it. For example, for me, I'm covering it for ABC News, so I'm not commentating, blow by blow what's happening. So I just need a basic understanding of the sport. For something like bocce, the way I would explain it is it's one of only 2 Paralympic sports that has no Olympic equivalent. And the easiest way to explain it is it's a cross between bocce and lawn bowls. So you've got a jack and you want to get your jack as close to the ball as possible. And some athletes may need assistance and may use a ramp to get their ball onto the ground. So I think that's how simply I would explain a sport like bocce without going into too much detail, knowing the audience that I'm communicating to is for ABC News. We don't have a lot of time. We just need to get the basics across. But if I was commentating, it would be a different story.
And excuse my ignorance, is the assistant, depending on the classification, and we saw that with your documentary, is the assistant a bocce or bowls player? They've got a background in the sport. Is that right?
Generally not. So for Jamison Leeson, for example, her mum was initially her ramp assistant, and now it's Jasmine Hayden, who also acts as her carer. So often it would be maybe a support worker or a carer or someone who is already spending a lot of time with that athlete. Then they train them up to become a ramp assistant, and they are acknowledged as an athlete themselves. If they win a medal, the ramp assistant gets a medal as well. But that's what I love with Jamison, how it started out being her mum. She was just a teenager when she started the sport, and she was in a small country town of Dunedoo of 700 people. So, of course, it's hard to find someone. So, yeah, mum, you can do it. So if anyone wants to get into Paralympic sport who is non-disabled, that's a great way in. You could be involved like that. And then, of course, we have, sports like, say, para-triathlon for vision-impaired athletes where they would have a guide. In that instance, you would have someone who is basically at a professional level, because you are doing everything. You're doing the swimming, the cycling, and the running. It's very physical. You couldn't just be any person that rocks up off the street, or you couldn't be someone's mum necessarily doing that role. But for bocce, you can, because it's about moving the ramp and placing it where the player tells you to.
Wonderful human interest stories there with the bocce, Amanda, aren't there? I mean, cycling's another one, isn't it? We saw Kira Modra, one of the all-time greats, had I think the same person cycling, didn't they, for a long, long time? And they had so much success at Paralympics. He was a vision impaired athlete, and he had, I think, the same, whose name escapes me at the moment, but they were a wonderful team for a long time, weren't they?
Yeah, so it's the same with cycling. You have a sighted pilot, and more often than not, they are an elite level cyclist themselves, and sometimes Australian representatives in an Australian context. So Jessica Gallagher will be going to these games, and she will have a pilot with her, for example, for these games as well. So that's a really important relationship to have someone that you gel with, not just someone who's good at the sport, but someone that you really gel with and can excel with too, because you're in it together. So for the vision impaired athletes in particular, that's one where it can be tricky finding the right combination. And when you do, you stick with it.
Star journalist Amanda Shalala from the ABC, who's been to numerous Paralympics, and we'll cover this one again, which gets underway very soon in Paris and was at the Olympic Games and also at the 2012 London Olympic Games. And she's been to Winter Paralympics as well as many summer Paralympics. She's my guest today in Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures and also inclusion talks for Aussie Home Loans, who have a number of areas of expertise, including first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, and personal loans. Amanda, you've done one Winter Olympics in Sochi in Russia. What was that experience like, and how different was it compared to the Summer Olympics?
It was so different. I had never done any winter games before, Olympics or Paralympics, and had the opportunity to do these ones because the ABC was the host broadcaster for it. Firstly, it wasn't cold, so that was interesting.
It wasn't cold.
I remember just wearing a t-shirt covering the games. No, it wasn't cold at all. It was probably like early 20s, the temperature, 21, 22 degrees. Because yeah, it was strange, but they had fake snow. There was still snow there. But it's a lot smaller, obviously, than a summer games. So the scale is a lot less. And you've got, primarily from an Australian perspective, all our focus was on the mountain because all the events were either alpine skiing or snowboarding. So we didn't cover the biathlon or anything like that. But it was really wonderful because the team was so small. I think for those games, it was maybe about 10 athletes. So you really got to know these athletes and build a relationship with them. And I think that makes for better interviews and makes for better coverage. One of my favorites was Ben Tudhope, who was a snowboarder. He was only 14 years old at the time. He finished in the top 10, and that was celebrated as if it was a gold medal, because that is an amazing achievement for a 14-year-old in his first games. And he was just the most bubbly, energetic, lovable young man that you could ever meet as well. So that helped. And his entire family was over there, his parents and his siblings. And he was just so buzzing and bursting with joy to have finished in the top 10. And he was chosen as the closing ceremony flag bearer as well for those games. A huge honor for a kid. So ever since then, he's always been one of my favourites. He has since gone on to be one of the absolute stars now of the Australian Paralympic team, winning a medal at the last games. He will again be one of the main contenders in a couple of years' time in Milano Cortina. Just an excellent human. He does a lot of work in the space of inclusion as well, and particularly in cerebral palsy and getting more kids with cerebral palsy involved in sport. So it was really wonderful to cover those Paralympics. Toby Kane was another who had a great games, won some medals, and was a real stalwart of the team. So I enjoyed that. Whereas the summer games, you're kind of a bit all over the place because there are just so many athletes and so many sports to keep across. It's a little bit more intimate and personal for a winter games from an Australian perspective.
So were you surprised, Amanda, when you went to Sochi and it was more manufactured in regard to the snow and it wasn't as cold as it might have been? I would have thought, excuse my ignorance here, that if a Winter Olympic city is chosen, it's chosen because it's cold. It's cold all the time. Places in Canada, places in Northern America, obviously Norway, Denmark, these sort of places, if they're chosen. But Russia, it obviously wasn't. It was more manufactured. Did that surprise you?
Yeah, look, it did get colder. It was only a part of the games. It was kind of warm. And then it did get colder. I did have to bring out the puffer jacket. But the Paralympics were also a couple of weeks after the Olympics. So the Olympics were held in the coldest period of time. And then as we moved into the Paralympics, it was, edging closer, getting out of that time as well. Sochi was an interesting one because it wasn't even an established ski town. It was a summer resort town for Russians, and they bid for the games. And when they got it, they created the mountain and they created all the infrastructure. So it wasn't like, Whistler or Salt Lake City or somewhere where it's already there. But that was Russia really wanted those games, and they did everything they could to get those games.
And did it look real? I know you said it was all built and all manufactured, but did it look real? Did you think if you didn't know the background, and obviously you would have done your homework on it, and all the other journalists would have too, but if you didn't know the background, would have you thought it was just like a normal winter city with great ski lifts, great mountains for the snow, etc.?
Yeah, I think so. It ticked all the boxes, although a lot of the athletes said that they could definitely feel the difference, particularly for those athletes in the sit skis, where they're just literally in sort of a bucket seat on a single ski, so they don't have quite the same balance. That was a bit more challenging for them because I think the manufactured snow can be a bit more icy and a bit more slippery, but from the naked eye as an observer, you couldn't really tell.
Now, Amanda, you said a little bit earlier about how more popular and how big of a profile the Paralympics have got. Are we there yet, or do we still have some work to do to get the understanding out there amongst the general public about what a great role Paralympics plays and all the ability sports plays in the community?
I think there is still more work to be done while acknowledging how far we have come in so many respects. Even in terms of the coverage now, it is so much more than when the games started. I think that is to be applauded. There's a lot more invested in terms of supporting the athletes. For example, the Paralympic medalists are going to receive the same amount of money as Olympic medalists received in Paris. That was also the case for Tokyo. So that's important. That's government funding. That's a sign of progression and equality. I think the public's understanding is a lot more, though. Probably things around language we could get better with, I think. Some people may still call it the Olympics or call it the Paralympics. So we could, improve understanding of that. It's the Paralympics. The way we understand and talk about disability, I think we can have a lot of great conversations around that through a vehicle like the Paralympics. So I think we should do that more as well. And I think we still need a bit more diversity within the Paralympics as well. So acknowledging the great work it's done. They're still not a fully gender equal games. So there are more female athletes competing at these games than did in Tokyo, but it's still not 50-50, whereas for example, at the Olympics, it was a fully gender equal games in terms of the participants. So there's some way to go there. And even in terms of the diversity of participants, say within the Australian team, we do know that we still don't have quite as many people from culturally diverse backgrounds or Indigenous Australians who are participating in disability sport. So that's at the elite level, but even filtering down to the grassroots level, as I mentioned before, there's still lower numbers of people with disability and particularly women participating in sport. So I think we celebrate the wins, how far it's come. The Paralympic movement has come on leaps and bounds. I think Sydney was a real turning point, and then London 2012 was another. And I think Paris can be the next one that can really kickstart it to take it even further.
So what do we need to do to make it more equal for women in regard to all ability sport, do you think?
Access and opportunity. It's kind of the same reason why there aren't as many women who are participating in non-disabled sport too, although the percentages are much lower in disability sport. Historically, sport has been set up by men for men to serve men. And so we're still trying to sometimes tweak those systems or restructure them. Sometimes we might need to start again from the very beginning because the systems were set up without that inclusion in mind. So maybe we need to start again and say, okay, we're going to design this sporting infrastructure and we're going to include women and women with disability and Indigenous Australians and people from culturally diverse backgrounds. We're going to include all of them from the start. So we're not trying to retrofit something. We're creating it with inclusion in mind from the very beginning.
Well-known sports producer, journalist, broadcaster with the ABC, Amanda Shalala, who'll be covering the 2024 Paris Paralympics after being to Paris for the Olympic Games and has done numerous winter and summer Paralympics, is my guest on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures and also Inclusion Talks podcast for Aussie Home Loans. Amanda, if someone had said to you when you were starting out on your journalism career, which I think was around 15, 16 years ago, that you would have achieved what you've achieved, you've travelled where you've travelled, you've done the interviews you've done, you've put together some of the best television documentary programs on sport that you've managed to achieve over the years, what would have you said to them?
Oh, I definitely wouldn't have believed it. I started out as a kid. All my heroes, my sporting heroes, were all men. I wanted to be like Adam Gilchrist, like Steve Waugh. I wanted to, play for the Dragons in the NRL. I just didn't have a concept of women being involved in sport. And even from a journalism perspective, like there were amazing women out there, of course, like some of my absolute heroes, Tracy Holmes, Debbie Spillane, Karen Ty. But the landscape was definitely dominated by male journalists and male broadcasters. So I thought, okay, that's what I've got to do. I'm going to cover the NRL men's competition and I'll just be like, those men who are covering it, because that's what you have to do to be a sports journalist. So I was very, very grateful to start my career at the ABC when I finished university, because that changed everything for me. I saw, wow, this is a place where they value inclusion and diversity. They value telling stories of all Australians, not just men who happen to play sport, and platforming and championing people from diverse backgrounds to tell those stories too. So I feel so privileged that I've had this career and that I started at a time when the ABC had the rights to the Paralympics. So my first Paralympics were Beijing 2008, which was soon after I had completed my initial traineeship with the ABC. And going to those games, it changed everything for me. I said, this is what I want to do. I don't want to be going out to the local footy grounds every weekend doing the NRL. I want to be covering these stories, because these people, they're beyond being amazing athletes. They are fantastic people, and we need to hear these stories. We need to champion these stories more. So it was from then on, I really decided my focus is going to be particularly Paralympic sport, and more broadly, sport for people with a disability, and women's sport and diversity in sport. And that's what I've built my career on, which is not what I would have thought when I wanted to be like Adam Gilchrist as a kid, but I'm very grateful because it's taken me to all corners of the world, met some of the most brilliant, extraordinary people I could ever have met, and have been very privileged to be able to share some of their stories.
Well, you mentioned a great friend of mine, an ex-colleague of mine who was a wonderful person for Paralympic sports, and she used to host the ABC coverage, and the great Karen Ty. How much, I'll use the I word, how much of an inspiration and a mentor has she been to you, Amanda?
We can use it when it comes to Karen. She definitely is an inspiration.
Oh, she's a beauty.
She's at the forefront of Paralympic coverage in Australia, at the helm of ABC's coverage, I think from Seoul up until London 2012, and then continuing her coverage even when we lost the TV rights, still with all her hosting duties with Grandstand. She only recently retired, a huge loss to the ABC, but well-deserved break for her. She is the epitome of a true professional. That's what I've learned from her is, preparation, professionalism, passion as well. The passion that she has absolutely shines through, and just the real genuine care and love that she has for the athletes and for the sport. None of it is fake or manufactured. It just emanates from every part of her. And she's so knowledgeable as well, and always willing to learn, always willing to lift others up. And that's what I was very grateful for, is just this young upstart starting my career when I worked with her in Beijing 2008. Just took me under her wing, was happy to share everything with me and lift me up, and wanted me to go forth and succeed. So she is absolutely just the best. I can't say enough good things about Karen. I love her.
Do you have a highlight in your career so far, or is that still in front of you, Amanda?
Oh, I mean, I hope there's many more to come, but I definitely can pick out a few. I mean, being part of a host broadcast team for a Paralympic Games, as we were for Beijing, London, and Sochi, but particularly those summer games because they were on such a grand scale, that is something quite special when you're there right on the sideline. So, for example, London, I was doing the track and field. So I'm right on the finish line, just eyeing it off, seeing these athletes cross the line. And I would be the first person that they spoke to after, whether they achieved their dreams or whether they had the result they didn't want. It wasn't their coach or their parents or their loved ones that they spoke to first. It was me. And I took that as a heavy responsibility, but it was incredible. One of my favorite memories from London was Simon Patmore, who was, I think it was 100 meters. And he lunged across the line. He fell across the line, and I think he tore his hamstring in the process. So he was in pain, but it was a photo finish. This wasn't for gold or silver. This was a photo finish for bronze. So he's lying there with the agony of his whatever he did to his hammy, but also hoping that he got a medal. And so I was just right there watching him. He's like writhing around in pain, but also this hopeful look on his face, looking up at the screen, and then it flashed up that he got the bronze medal. And it nearly brings me to tears now because just the explosion of excitement and joy that came out of him. And I had interviewed him previously, and he saw me, and I was the first recognizable person he saw. So he like comes over to me and gives me a hug, and it was just so lovely to share that experience with him. And I love those moments where we focus a lot on gold. And yeah, it's elite sport. We are going to focus a lot on gold or on medals. But yeah, for Simon, it was just about, he gave absolutely everything he had, and to come away with something was the ultimate dream for him. And I was lucky to just be the bystander that got to be a part of it as well. So like that's there are many other highlights, but being a part of a host broadcaster where you're actually in the venue watching it all and talking to the athletes straight after is pretty special.
I've done the mixed zone a bit, a couple of Olympic Games when I've covered them for ABC and radio, the three that I've done. You don't get a lot of time, do you? But obviously,
No.
as you say, it's a privilege to be able to be the host broadcaster and get to ask the first questions. Probably get two or three. You've got to make it count, don't you?
I'm very big on this. I don't like the cliches. And these are things that people like Karen taught me. You don't want to be asking, oh, how does it feel? How do you feel?
Yeah.
We've got to be better than that. We're
Yes.
professionals. We're professional question askers, essentially, in many respects. So you've got to tap into that emotion, assess the dynamic of the interview as well, whether it could go longer or shorter, and try not to be hackneyed or cliched. And so it can be challenging at times. There's a lot of pressure as an interviewer in that situation, but that's why we're selected. It's a selection process for us to go through to get to cover these events. And I feel very strongly about that. We have to do well in doing our job in that sense too, and not just making statements, oh, that must be great, good on you, and just expect someone to talk. We have to actually ask insightful questions.
So with Simon, did you think, well, I've got a little bit of time here because he's waiting, which is excruciating for athletes. I interviewed Debbie Flintoff-King on our program, Dashing Down to Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, and she thought she'd won, but it took a long time ago now, back in 1988, for it to come up that she had just won. So he had a bit of time, didn't he? And you, I suppose, had a bit of time to think what you're going to ask. Did you say, were you confident of getting bronze? Was that one question you would ask, or thought you should ask, or not?
Honestly, I can't remember what I asked. It was 12 years ago now. Yeah. I hope, let's not go back to the tape. Let's hope I asked really great questions. Did. I didn't say, how do you feel, or something like that. Now that I've said, I never say it. I probably have, you wouldn't have. At times in my career. But in those scenarios as well, even though we don't have much time, like, you do get to judge it. And sometimes I'm like, if I've got a good thing going here, I will keep going a bit longer, and also respecting when I'm told to move on. So sometimes it might be the best interview ever, but you see the media manager out of the corner of your eye saying, wrap it up. And that's an important relationship to manage as well, because if I don't listen to them at that time, then I won't get the next interview that comes around. So I'll always abide by those instructions as well. It's like, okay, let's go. You got to move on to the next one. But if the person's there, they're happy, everyone's happy, I keep going too.
Outside the Paralympics, Amanda, is there something you'd like to do down the tracks as a broadcaster?
Oh, I think I'd just love to cover major events. So a real highlight for me outside of the Olympics and Paralympics last year was covering the FIFA Women's World Cup at home in Australia and New Zealand. So I would love to cover an overseas FIFA Women's World Cup, because that's just different. I mean, covering one at home, I don't think anything could match that, particularly the way the Matildas went, but it's the biggest standalone women's sporting event in the world. So it would be quite something to experience that in a different country, because it's quite exciting as a journalist when you get to go to another country and cover a major sporting event. So I think that would be one for me. And I really would love to do LA. I would love to do both games, the Paralympics and the Olympics. So I'm always looking at what's the next major event that I can do and try and tick it off the list.
You'd love to do Brisbane too, wouldn't you?
Oh, of course. I mean, Brisbane, that's a given. I'm like, that's at home. No matter what, nobody can stop me from doing Brisbane. I'll be there.
You'll be there, absolutely. Can I just ask you a question about the Matildas? Have they not coped with the adulation they received after a magnificent performance where the whole nation was behind them. They stopped what they were doing. It was even in the middle of AFL and NRL seasons. As you know, they're king in this country in winter, depending on which part of Australia you're from. But they were magnificent in getting as far as a semi-final. But to me, I'm not sure that they've sort of coped with the adulation since in regard to their on-field performances. You covered it. What do you think?
I think in terms of the Olympics in particular, it was definitely an underperformance. It was disappointing to see the nature of the loss to Germany. They won against Zambia, but to have a 5-4 scoreline and to leave it to the last minute, that was not good. And then the loss to the US. I think there were a number of factors. I mean, having Sam Kerr missing, the best player in the world, the best player that the Matildas have probably ever seen, that certainly didn't help. And they showed that they didn't necessarily recover from that. Tony Gustafsson did some wonderful things while in charge of the team, but I think that Olympics showed that his time was definitely up. Tactically, perhaps things didn't go quite to plan. The depth that he tried to build in that team perhaps wasn't quite executed to the degree that we would have liked to have seen. And just the lack of killer instinct in front of goal has been something which even hurt them during the World Cup. So I think I would be interested to see the development of Mary Fowler from here. I think she should be the foundation upon which the team is built, and really having to bring that next generation through, because Kerr's not going to be around that much longer. There's a whole older guard, shall we say, that are going to be on their way out very soon, the likes of, Caitlin Ford, Tamika Yallop, Katrina Gorry. So I don't know whether it was the adulation necessarily or the aftermath of the World Cup. Perhaps there was a bit of a World Cup hangover, but I think it's a combination of key injuries, maybe not quite the depth that we would have liked, and maybe some tactical missteps that resulted in what we saw in Paris. And so hopefully that can be a turning point for them to regroup and get back on the right track for the next World Cup and then the next Olympics.
So you're confident this was just an aberration and women's football in this country will continue to develop on the back of a successful World Cup campaign in this country last year?
As long as it is continued to be invested in, and that's important because the A-League women's competition still needs more. There are still clubs that do not have adequate resources invested in them. That's where the talent pool is going to come from. We now know they're going to go overseas. They will go play in Europe or the US, just as the men do, and that's fine. But the A-League women still needs to be that very fertile breeding ground. So is it currently set up for success to do that well into the future? I think it probably needs a bit more investment than it currently has to ensure that the progress doesn't stagnate here. It must continue to flourish. So yes, I believe it can, with the caveat that we need to ensure we are giving our grassroots level players and our national competition the best chance to succeed.
Amanda, in closing, I'll get you to put your head on the chopping block in a nice way, of course. How many gold can Australia win at the Paralympics?
Well, I said, look, I think a top 5 finish is feasible for the Australians. So off the top of my head, I can't remember how many gold we won in Tokyo, but say in the realms of like 30, 35 gold, maybe something like that. Remembering there are a lot more events in the Paralympics than the Olympics. So that's why we're dealing with a lot more medals. But maybe let's say about 30 gold will be my hope. And my overall hope is a top 5 finish.
And can I ask you, the most intriguing sport I've ever come across in either Winter or Summer Olympics, I think you know which sport I'm talking about, it's curling. Do you understand it? I most certainly do not.
No, I haven't had to get across it. We've never had, I don't think we've had Australians in it.
Yeah.
No, I've got no idea. I'm pretty good with a lot of sports, not curling.
It's like cleaning the floor, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
I love watching it, but am I the wiser at the end of watching it about what it's all about? No, but I can't turn it off because it's just one of those incredible sports that you think, well, it's a sport, but what are they doing? It's obviously if you played it, you know what you're doing. Amanda, I really appreciate your time. What's the body clock going to be doing? You'd be sleeping during the day and up all night. Is that how it's going to work for the next days or so?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing a night shift. So not overnight, but sort of late night shifts. So I'll be working across ABC, TV, radio, and online, providing coverage for all those platforms. And we'll have people working, all through the night, as well as our team on the ground in Paris. We've got it all covered. So yeah, it's going to be a good time. I don't care about the lack of sleep. It's sport. I'm watching sport and talking about sport. What could be better than that?
It's not a bad way to earn a living, Amanda, is it? It's the
Yeah.
best job in the world. Amanda Shalala, I really appreciate your time. Congratulations on what you've achieved so far. When I say enjoy, you'll be working very, very hard, but you do a great job as usual. Really love what you do. You do a great job, and I look forward to watching closely and listening closely to all your reports at the Paralympics of 2024 in Paris. Thanks so much for joining us on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures, and also Inclusion Talks for Aussie Home Loans to deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital city. Go well, and we hope to speak again soon. Thanks, Amanda.
Pleasure. Thanks so much, Dan.